And we are live. Hey, so I'm excited. This evening, we're jumping into another state story. It's been a minute since we've done this. I think, without taking the time to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure that the last time we did this, it was Clausington, and we were doing the great state of Pennsylvania. So that might have been all the way back in 2025. I believe it was. Might have been September, October. Anyways, I am looking forward to doing this one, not simply because we're jumping back into state stories, but, and hopefully I don't provide too much consternation to all the Tar Heels out there, but I have declared North Carolina as my adoptive mother when it comes to states. So I've got just enough experience in there to make me a touch dangerous, but I am super excited about jumping in with the Kaiser and going over what is the state of North Carolina, who is the state of North Carolina, and where is she headed in this upcoming century. And with that, Kaiser, if you want to jump in and introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is, I go by Kaiser von Lohengramm on Twitter. I'm a member of the Nathaniel Green Society over in North Carolina. I'm also the historian for the chapter as well as one of its delegates. So I mainly lead in the coastal area of North Carolina, but I go all over the state just doing different projects with NGS, which is mainly a fraternal and heritage society. So I'll hopefully be able to do my state justice. And I think my favorite way of describing it, I can't remember who exactly coined this, but when one of the ways that we describe North Carolina here is we are a valley of humility between two pillars of conceit. The two pillars being South Carolina and Virginia, and us being, this humble, um, you know, state, which even with our origins, it kind of fits that because both in South Carolina and in Virginia, you had this settlement by Cavaliers who would come in, and you had a much more landed aristocracy there. And the way that I think it's really interesting to see how we actually formed our own colony, because we were one of the original 13. And the way it actually happened, I find quite fascinating, just because all of these Scots, Irish, German settlers had flooded down from Pennsylvania roughly in the early 1700s and late 1600s, and had started to settle more of this area. And then their character was just very different from the landed elite and aristocracy of South Carolina, where you had one of the most like the way that their legislature functioned and how they actually were able to run their colonial legislature in South Carolina was extremely top heavy. You had to basically only just a small handful of elites were running everything, versus you had a bunch of Presbyterian Scots Irish settlers who had just come down, who very much did not care for that form of running a state. And so in order to actually um, have some kind of, they ultimately decided that it was best to just cut ties, and we're going to give you the northern half, you're going to take the southern half. And then that ultimately led to North Carolina as what we see it as, what we would describe ourselves, again, this valley of humility, something that often gets overlooked compared particularly to both the state to our north and to our south. But we've had a place in this history for quite some time, and I know that you said that it's your adoptive mother. Why do you give it that title? I'm curious.
Uh, let me think about the stuff that I'm willing to go into.
Okay.
Because yeah, so some of it I won't go too far into detail with, but people can put it together when I talk about military and if they think about East Coast and all that. So that's as far as we'll go on that one for the most part. But then really, it's ties to the western side out into the greater Hickory Statesville area.
Okay.
I've got
Yeah. I mean,
I've
oh, so, got you. Yeah. I know.
yeah.
I mean, ultimately, like, it was mainly settlers from North Carolina who ended up settling Tennessee. It's also funny because I believe every president that has had some tie to North Carolina is more known for being from Tennessee or from that area. Like, I believe Jackson has ties here, and then he's not known for being a North Carolinian. So it is
Yeah.
interesting to see like how we end up floating out like that. I'm curious to oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say my family in North Carolina, it's a little bit different in that they had crossed through, and then for whatever reason, they'd come up out of Kentucky and decided to move back to North Carolina.
Huh. So yeah, I have some ties to Kentucky as well. One of the people who created the Constitution of the state of Kentucky was one of my ancestors, and they also came from North Carolina. And then besides
Okay,
them, it was mainly just borderers and backwoods English and Scots Irish settlers for the most part.
right.
It is
Yeah.
great to come to this state, especially because like I spent a lot of time moving around to different um, places when I was younger. I've been all over the United States, but I ended up coming back over to here where my roots are. It's just been a journey of reconnecting with that and learning more about the state, learning
Yes.
more of the things that have gone on here. Um,
Well, and maybe that's a good place to jump into it too. Is that the state for the uninitiated? I would separate it into, unless we give Raleigh Durham its own portion. I would say the state is roughly three different areas where you've got the coastline, and you've got coastal Carolina, and then you come back into the middle, and then you've got the plains area, so to speak, and that's ultimately where Raleigh, Durham, all that is. And then you get up into the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains into Appalachian, North Carolina, and that's going
yep.
to be what Hickory and Asheville and that whole
Yeah,
area.
so that's exactly how it's divided. It's the coastal region, which includes the Cape Fear, and the gosh, I'm blanking on their name. The chain of islands that's to the west.
Oh,
All the that
yeah.
actually make up our border. I'm blanking on its name. It's one of those beautiful things that you can actually see. But if you look at like um,
Well,
North Carolina
and
on a
the
map, oh,
mhm.
the Outer Banks. Hi, amazing that I'm
Okay,
forgetting that.
that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I was going to ask you. OBX or whatever. So,
Yeah. So the Outer
yeah.
Banks. So like if you look at North Carolina on a map, it looks like it has this very clean border, but that's not actually how it is geographically because that is just this chain of like islands that is the Outer Banks that you can pretty much drive across. Um,
Yeah.
that is this like just beautiful area. All of these very old moneyed. It's a very aristocratic part of it, but they have all these houses that
Hmm.
are like out on stilts. It's a really
Yes.
interesting thing to see, like all these beachfront property, and it is a very beautiful part of the country. Kitty Hawk too is very worthwhile to
Mm.
see over there. That's where the Wright brothers actually took off from. We are where the very first successful manned aviation ever occurred in was us.
Right. Ohio's always fighting about that one.
No, it was definitely North Carolina. We were first in a lot of things that people don't
Yes.
realize. Even going back, the very first colonial settlement of the very first Englishmen who ever set foot and tried to make something permanent here, that happened in Roanoke, and Roanoke is a part of North Carolina. It ultimately failed, and they have a really
Yeah.
interesting myth too that the Roanoke settlers after that had collapsed, and there's this bizarre case where when Sir Walter Raleigh returns to Roanoke, it's completely deserted, no real signs that anyone had actually died, and then there's the word Croatoan just carved into
Hmm.
a tree that's there, and that's the only sign that they have. And there is a group that is very similar. If you know anything about Virginia, the Melungeons, who are these sort of mixed group that came about out of whites, Native Americans, and blacks who had kind of just mixed in and formed this kind of like outsider group out on the fringes and the borders. We have our own version of that, the Lumbee tribe over in North
Okay.
Carolina, and their kind of mythos that they have is that they were descendants of the Roanoke colonists who had mixed in with this native tribe and then formed the Lumbee. Whether there's any truth to that, I don't know, but it is just kind of an interesting myth that we have out of the state. But we do have other. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was trying to remember now. If I remember correctly, the tribal headquarters are in Oklahoma. But is the was it North Carolina or Kentucky that was sort of the predominant homeland of the Cherokee?
Oh, North Carolina is, that's where the Cherokee War happened. We were where they had that
Okay.
original. That is where they were originally at, and then they were removed from just after the French and Indian War. They got pushed back more, and then after the Indian Removal Act in Jackson, that's when they actually
Hmm.
moved much further out.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience to be a semi-grown man in my 20s, sort of relearning about the whole Trail of Tears, because I was brought up with my grandfather saying, Jackson was a bastard, and he made our people walk too far or whatever. But yeah, so that was the Cherokee thing. But that's one of those iffy things. Like, there's this weird group in America where like everybody is apparently Cherokee, and
Yeah,
it's like you
see
just
what you
don't.
mean. Yeah.
It's like, I mean, maybe it's true, but dude, we didn't even like, other than giving the middle finger to Jackson, it was like, okay. So
Yeah,
I don't count it for anything.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of I think it's a lot of the, like, especially, like, Southern Americans, I think is where you see more of that is, where they'll try to claim some bit of Indian heritage and identity,
Yeah.
and you'll see it too, here as well because we have a lot of Highland settlers. We're one of the few places where the Highlanders actually did settle at very early on in the Cape Fear
Mm.
region. But as America has started to like once it started to lose more of that identity of like something that you could cling on to that has an actual heritage to it, I think a lot of people just ended up trying to pull on this. Well, I'm like 2 or 3% Cherokee, or I'm 2 or 3%
Yeah.
Chickasaw. I've got like my great 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 grandpappy was a chieftain, and I think
I
that
always
they,
get,
yeah, go.
yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Oh yeah, so I think that it's partially just because you can't say like I'm proud that my family were settlers who actually came here and they,
Yeah.
colonized this land and took it and built everything. When you can't say that as well and not get some kind of public backlash for it, you end up gravitating towards things like that. And oddly, like Scotland or like pulling on some of these European aspects also gets a bit of a pass where rather than
Yes.
saying like I'm an American by blood, you could say, oh, I'm a Scottish settler, I'm a Scottish American, and then it's almost like
Right.
they encourage you to rehyphenate yourself based off of this like, oh, you got like 12% Scottish in you, rather than just embracing the fact that Americans are a storied people that generally comes out of the Northwest European settlers who came here, settled these lands, and had their own ethnogenesis into making a very distinct people. That
Yeah.
identity is something that you're not allowed to embrace. And so a lot of people, you will see this, especially in North Carolina, that people will say, oh, well, I'm like 3% Cherokee, I'm 4% Cherokee,
Yeah.
just to try and have something to cling to with that.
So the whole Kentucky and sort of into the North Carolina line and all that. It's interesting because uh, that was my mother's side, and like you're talking about, they are the ones that I can go back. I mean, they're coming over here early 17th century, and they're English colonials. That's what they were. They came in and moved through, um, and they will go to we got a little bit more on the wood pile. My dad, on the other hand, his line's strict German, like up until I am the first half breed out of his lines. Now, having said that, if you had asked my dad at any point while he was alive, like, yeah, so where are you from? He's like, well, I'm American. It's like, well, yeah, but where are you from? He's like, dude, I'm American. And again, having said that, I mean, we knew his background. I am the only one in my daggum family who has yet to be to the fatherland. It doesn't bother me much, um, but it's where are you from? Well, I'm American. And so it was interesting to see that sort of contrast between uh, my mother's English colonial side and then my dad's German but not really side.
Yeah, and I think that's again. I think it's harder. Like you essentially weren't allowed to just say I am an American and that is my heritage because again,
Yeah.
we decided sometime in the 1960s, more or less, that now everyone gets to be an American. Therefore, you're not allowed to claim it like that. But I think it's good to
Hmm.
see terms like heritage American. Personally, I'm more of a fan of founding stock, but I'll use both just because I think it is worthwhile to distinguish sort of the identities that came out of the, you know, 17th and 16th century moving versus the
Sure.
18th, 19th, which tends to be more of the heritage. But even then, all of it's sort of blending in
Well,
and mixing in with coming to a distinct American group
Yes.
that has its
Yeah,
own regional differences.
and that's so now we're really getting into it. But that's one of my arguments is that post post Civil War, post War of Northern Aggression, war between states, however we want to frame it, there was a there was an ethnogenesis that was absolutely occurring. That's also one of the reasons that I run to Lonesome Dove as sort of like the American novel, because I think it's got to
Oh, I
be
love Lonesome
some
Dove.
yeah, I think it's got to be some sort of post Civil War, what were we becoming type thing. It's I don't want to dismiss the revolutionary portion. I don't want to dismiss the actual founding. But I run to the post Civil War as sort of the American ethnogenesis occurring, and I argue that it was interrupted during Hart Celler and everything that happened post 64.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it definitely comes in phases, and when you're looking at ethnogenesis, it does change over time. And I would
Yep.
argue that you really have to. I think the moment that you had a successful settlement in America is when you actually really started to have an ethnogenesis. Because the way that I frame it
Mm,
is that the people that actually came onto boats and came here and the people that stayed behind, the moment that that decision is presented to you, whether you will take this risk, go across an
yeah.
ocean, have this significant chance of dying, but you have this opportunity to build something out of nothing where there's this just open expanse, open land, there's not much there, you can take what you want from it, but there's the significant risk, there's these, you know, savage people that are also there that might you might have to fight with in order to get some of this.
If it hasn't reached yet into actual physiognomy or whatever, we could still say that there's an element of biospirit that's distinguishing itself.
Yes, yeah. And it's that decision I think is going to get you a different makeup of people where the people who actually say yes to this are just going to be different. And I think even when you look at how we were at the revolution, it was a different group of people than England, especially in terms of like what their religious background was, what
Mhm.
ethnic groups you had that had come here already. All of that was a distinctive difference between how it was there, especially like, again, looking at to bring it back to North Carolina, we were very much a bunch of backwoods Scots Irish settlers all along the Piedmont. We had this coastal English elite and we had a bit of Germans with us. And that was essentially the makeup of who we were. And
Now, because go ahead, go ahead. Yep.
oh, no, no. And I think that that's also just how you get these distinct groups out of that where you do have this kind of like pride in these different states and these different peoples and you see these distinguishments especially between you know, like I think Yankees and Southerners have a very distinct difference and you could probably draw that through what was it like in Plymouth and what was it like in Jamestown, and a lot of this is just a
Yes.
flow out of those two, and that's where I pull from, is that you have these sort
I
of two foundings.
I
But
was going to say delineate there between or sorry, not delineate, but define what we mean by Yankees.
yeah, by Yankees, I mean everyone that's north of Virginia is what is to me is a
So
Yankee.
interesting. Yeah, because so coming from the Great Lakes, that is not at all how we would define it.
Yeah, I mean, well,
But
nobody wants to be a Yankee. Like, there's that great
oh,
distinction where, yeah, if you're, well, it is sort of like a negative in a lot of ways. Where like outside of the U.S., everyone thinks that everyone
yeah,
in America is a Yankee.
yes, yeah,
If you
yeah,
ask, you know, the South, it's everyone that's you know in the
north
northern
of the Mason
area.
Dixon,
Yeah, north of
right,
them. And then if you ask them, it's everyone who's in New England. If you ask New Englanders, it's just
100%,
people in Vermont. And then in Vermont, it's a person who likes to eat pie for breakfast. Like
right.
everyone sort of passes off the Yankee term.
Yeah, I know there was, and I can't take credit for this. It's just once I heard Semyagog say this, it was like, oh my goodness, he's right. But that whole idea of there was an aspect of Yankee culture though that you could sort of look back on, and that was the peddler, the carpenter, the sort of the skilled craftsman part. And I remember just growing up on PBS, what was it, the New Yankee Workshop or whatever? Like that was one of those things that okay, that's one area where there is something in there. There is something about working with your hands and being a skilled artisan.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, especially if you just look at like what the settlers of Plymouth were like, and if you look at like some of how New England was. I mean, that was where shipbuilding happened, so they
Yeah.
definitely are decent at, and they are industrious in that aspect. Um, to go a little bit more, also just into the history of it, have you ever heard anything about the regulators by any chance? Because this is one of my favorite topics with North Carolina.
Not not to the point that I'm familiar with what you're saying.
So, since we're just talking about these different groups and other things with
Yes.
North Carolina, the regulators, and I like to take pride in this, we were the first people in to actually take up arms and fight a battle against the British authorities during the Revolutionary War. Well before Lexington and Concord happened, you had the Battle of Alamance County in 1771, where this regulator movement that had started, where you had all of these settlers, especially in the Piedmont area, had been getting swindled out of their land and had a whole bunch of different tax policies passed against them, ways of land speculators coming in and ultimately like seizing a lot of their farms. And so they started this movement against this, against these policies, that would eventually culminate into a couple of riots that would occur in the 68, I believe, is the first time they had one. And then Governor Tryon, who was the colonial governor at the time, tried to say like, oh, okay, we'll make some reforms and we'll pass things. But then he ended up taking a bunch of the tax money and was building Tryon Palace with it, which made them extremely angry.
Is that
And then
Newbern? I'm trying to remember.
I'm actually forgetting exactly where it is, but I do need to visit it at some point.
I'm pretty sure it's Newbern. You keep talking. I'm going to look it up.
Okay. But anyways, so they had continued, and then there's this they raided the courthouse at Hillsborough twice over the course of this. And the second time they did, they engaged in some pretty insane and brutal actions where it was they were dragging people out and beating them in the streets for all these different court officials. They defecated in the jurors' chairs, and they put a dead slave that they dug up out of the graveyard into the judge's chair to say that this is who is essentially judging us. Like this is that was their symbol of protest against it, and then that would culminate in them taking up arms, fighting at the Battle of Alamance, getting absolutely demolished by the colonial militia, getting their leaders hung and executed, having to be forced to take an oath of loyalty. So it didn't go very well, but we were the first people to actually try this. And you find this kind of repeating pattern with North Carolina where they're often the first in a lot of regards, but they aren't the most well known or the most successful. I think you see with the Wright brothers too, this similar aspect where it's like, yeah, we took off and we had this flight here, but is it really like that huge? It kind of is, but it was nothing compared to like the commercial flights or some of the other pioneers that would come about, like the transatlantic flights and other things.
Well, in fairness too, weren't they from Ohio? And
I
they
believe
were
they
flying out
were,
there,
but
or
they did
okay.
fly out of Kitty Hawk just because the
Yes.
conditions were better.
Oh
Um,
yeah, 100%. So I did look it up for those that are listening. Tryon Palace is it's one of my great misfortunes to have not been there or to have not gone there. But it is Newbern, and that is also the birthplace of Pepsi.
oh yeah, that's true as well. But yeah, so sorry, where was I at with it? Oh yeah, so North Carolina also just being first. We also one of my favorite things that we have is the Mecklenburg Declaration, which gets disputed. But we did have the Halifax Accords as well. But essentially, in 1775, we were the first ones to actually try for and declare independence. The document gets disputed. I personally believe that it's true. But we were the first ones to actually do that, which is interesting too, because in the Civil War, we were actually the last ones, more or less, to join. We were one of the last states to actually decide to join with the Confederacy. So we have just this odd repeating pattern of being like very early adopters or very late in a lot of things.
Yeah. Yep. So there's some stuff as we move on into this and get into industries. There are some comments about innovation in regards to agriculture that I'm looking forward to talking with you about and seeing what you think about that, and especially into the 21st century where North Carolina is headed. All right, good. So, question for you: it's kind of esoteric, off the wall, but you keep bringing up the Germans. Are you familiar with the Plot family?
The Plot family. I actually can't say that
Yes.
I am, but I'm interested in hearing about them.
Okay. They came over. 18th century, I believe. It was pre Revolutionary War period. German family, and they brought over their special dogs to keep it real short and just whitewash everything. They now have the only American breed of coonhounds that are not descended from an English foxhound.
Really? Okay, that's
Yes,
fascinating. I don't suppose you have a picture
and
of them.
I'll pull one up here in a second. And the Plot Hound is the state dog of North Carolina.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess there are some things where you clearly know more about North Carolina than I do, but I'm always interested in learning more and
It's
hearing more.
that's my quirk chungus effect because I love coon hunting and coon dogs, and I love dogs in general.
Yeah, same
Um,
here. But I just didn't know that we had our own one that was not descended from an English breed. That's interesting.
yes, and it's the state dog.
Okay, well
Um,
that's something unique I could bring up because I've got a lot of good friends in Virginia, and they like to point out they try to say that North Carolina is just an extension of Greater Virginia. It's just this like silly cousin that we have to our south. And one of the things that they'll point out is the fact that our state bird is exactly the same. Our state tree is the same as Virginia. But if we have our own dog,
what's your bird?
it's the cardinal. Cardinal.
Yeah, but everybody's just the Cardinal. So is Kentucky. So is Ohio.
Yeah, but
So
Virginia's the
yeah.
first, and they're the ones who got it, and so
Ah,
therefore it's their bird, and we just all stole it from theirs.
okay. I will say, if you go into like Galax, and if you go anywhere west of Galax in Virginia, it's similar. It's similar, but I mean, if you're hanging out in Charlottesville, or well, you can't count Richmond because like cities are all cities in a way, and so it's like yeah, you have Monument Drive, um, but no, Charlottesville is super different than. I mean, maybe I'm trying to think of another small town in North Carolina that would be like a cognate for Charlottesville. Maybe like a Greenville or Wilmington, maybe. But even then, nah. I think I think they aren't doing y'all justice.
Oh no, I would agree. I think we're a very unique state that is not at all similar to Virginia. Like we really are just we have our own character to us, that's for sure. On top of that,
Yes.
I think we have a brighter future right now than Virginia.
So, well, good lord. Yes,
It's not saying
the
much
short.
to say that,
I was
but
gonna say, but the short answer is yes. So, do me a favor. You go ahead
yes,
and talk about how the Civil War affected North Carolina, what North Carolina's role was in the Civil War, and while you do that, I'm going to be finding us a plot hound.
awesome. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So North Carolina in the Civil War is interesting because we don't join with the initial, states who decide to secede. We actually were intent initially at staying with the Union. And the thing that actually drove us to make the determination that we are actually going to go ahead with the Confederacy is because Lincoln put down an order after Fort Sumter for North Carolina to raise a army of 3,000 militia and march upon South Carolina during this. And when they had received that order, they decided that if we're going to be forced into a conflict, if we are going to have to bear arms, because ultimately it was they just didn't want to fight their own brothers in this. But if they're now being told we have to pick up arms, no matter what, we're going to have to be in some kind of conflict. The governor responds and he says, "You will get no troops from North Carolina." And very shortly after that is when we actually decide then to secede. And after we secede, we were actually one of the largest. We had some of the most men come from North Carolina out of almost any other state. I believe it's 130,000 North Carolinians served under arms. We were one of the top ones. I believe Virginia was certainly bigger than us in terms of material production, in terms of war contributions, but in terms of sheer fighting men, we had some of the most here. That would then go on. There was very little that actually occurred in terms of battles here until the very end. We did have the only port that was open for most of the war, and there is a very fascinating battle. I got to actually go see the museum not too long ago. I am forgetting the name of it. Let me see. Give me 1 second while I also look something up.
All right.
But it's
so let's see. Here is your plot hound.
okay. Let's look at it.
Yep. So it's a
Oh,
brindle. It's a brindle hound. Is what
oh
it is.
yeah,
So
no,
it
I've
does
seen
it.
these before.
Okay. Yep. There is a picture floating about from the early 20th century. Or it's either the early 20th or late 18th century, with some members of the Plot family with their hounds. Well, now they're showing a black and tan. I don't know why. But yeah, so you guys have that, and I can't find the historic picture I was looking for. But you've got that, and then you also have, is it the Carolina dog?
I know the Carolina dog is the thing. I could not tell you
Yes,
anything about it.
I believe it's one of. This is, I'm shooting in the dark a little bit here, because I didn't dig down as deep with those guys. But if I remember correctly, it's one of the only indigenous dogs within the U.S.
Huh. Really?
And
Okay.
yeah, but I might be wrong. It might be like Mustangs where some of them went
Oh, yeah.
feral.
And then they
Um,
just got picked up.
but right, but it might not be. It might be legitimately a wild dog. I will see if I can find that for us. If you happen to have your information yet.
Okay, no, I have it. So
Okay, perfect.
anyways, yeah, the one major battle that did occur in North Carolina that was quite pivotal was the Battle of Fort Fisher during the Civil War. We were the only port that was really open and able to function throughout almost the entirety of the war. It was out of Wilmington. And Fort Fisher is this
Mm-hmm.
really interesting place that you can go see, where it's this kind of inlet where it is able to very easily guard against any kind of naval attack. And you're able to have this, trying to think of the best way to describe it. Essentially, there's a small opening that the fort is able to defend very well. And then you have this inlet inside that's completely protected, that's separated by a landmass. So it's this bay that's inside with Wilmington, where you can then have ships, you can have them come in, and they can launch out from there. And so it was able to stay open for quite some time. Survived one attack, and they won the first battle of Fort Fisher. They lost the second under an overwhelming assault. But it was really interesting to see. I had hopes when I went there that it hadn't been annihilated like most Civil War battlefields are, most
Yes.
museums are. Sadly, it there's almost nothing I think that is untouched. Because when I went in, most of it was they literally had a entire section that said initially this fort had been this museum had put forward the bravery and the heroism of both sides and didn't take a moral stance. Now we are changing that. And then it was mostly about like, here's the slaves that worked on it. Here's the indigenous people. Here's how great
No
it was when they
glory.
beat it. They even had this like section inside of the museum where it's like, oh, and there was a black soldier who slept with a ton of white women there, and he was known for this. And it's like, what even is this? It was,
Wow. They're
yeah,
just
I'm not even
trying to
kidding.
blow up the Randy black soldier.
Yes, that is literally like what you will see if you go there. Now,
Okay.
here's the white pill out of it is they still have
Yes.
a monument to the that the Daughters of the Confederacy erected in 1922. And that's really
Yes.
the
Okay.
only thing that you need to see there, because all it does is tell you it's this it's just this column with an eagle on top, and there's just four bronze plaques all around this column, and
Okay.
all it says, it's one of them is a depiction of the battle. Another one says, here's where these battles occurred here, and then here's all the soldiers that fought there and died there. And it's just this very basic monument that is all you need. And luckily, that is untouched and stays. Um,
Okay. Now,
yeah,
which
but
fort was this?
Fort Fisher,
Fort
it's
Fisher.
near
Okay.
Wilmington. Yeah, it's worth
Yeah.
seeing. And that area too is quite beautiful. But it is, if you want to know a little bit about like how, because after seeing this, I was just like, how were they able to do this to just about every single museum? And what it
Yeah.
is they are able to purchase out all of these museums, these different left-wing groups, where they will
Hmm.
essentially give them a very paltry sum, all things considered. They don't buy these museums. They just say, hey, we're going to give you like a $50,000 grant with the
Right.
caveat that you're going to let us redo a bunch of your information that's there. And they'll just
Did
agree to it.
you did you do a thread about this a while back?
I might have. I do
Or
a lot
did
of
I
threads about a
feel
lot of
like
things.
yeah, that's fair. Somebody, I feel like somebody did. Because now that you're talking about, sort of a paltry sum, and then they bring in all the plaques. Somebody, maybe it was Buffalo Dan, or maybe he was citing you. I don't know. Anyways, yeah. Now that you're saying that, it's like, oh my goodness. But it is ridiculous. And I will say, the last time I went to Monticello was
No,
2000. Was that?
oh, I was just sad about Monticello.
Yes.
I was just lamenting it. But please tell me your story of Monticello.
Well, I went there. I can't. It was either 2019. No, it had to been. It was pre-COVID, so it must have been 2019 that I had gone out there. And my goodness, it what had. So I had originally gone out there in 2008 ish, 2009. And it seemed, now we also got to think, like, back at that time, dude, I didn't even know what woke was. I wasn't on my guard against anything. So maybe it was as bad as it was in 29, but it seemed relatively even handed back in
No, it
2008.
got way worse around the
Yes.
BLM era.
Well,
Yeah,
and that's so the Sally Hemming thing was definitely there when I went there. I don't think it was nearly as loud as it was going to get. I suspect, I haven't been back there since 2019, and so I suspect it is worse at this point. But already there was a question there of how poorly the slaves were treated. Which the first time I had gone, it was this question of, you know was slavery right or wrong. They kind of left that up to you, in that they recognized most of the white folks in that particular area of Virginia, if they were not landed gentry of some sort, they lived worse than Jefferson's slaves. They lived worse than most slaves, because they didn't have a landowner that was able to provide for them. And then Jefferson himself would, assuming the slaves wanted to participate in various bits of education, he made that available to them. And that was, again, something that most white folks did not have the opportunity to engage in. And so the question at the end of it, the only real bit of pushing they did was to say, so which is better? To be a white man and to have your freedom, or to be a black man, to be a slave and be told what to do, but have access to better amenities and more education.
yeah, that is far beyond anything that you'll ever see there. Which now it's like the Sally Hemings house in Monticello.
Yeah, that's
Um,
all it. Ah, man.
and I
I tell you,
I
have
did
you been
send
out
you.
there before? Or I think I asked
I'm
you that, right?
dreading actually going.
Yeah.
I want to go because Jefferson is by like, and this is now a total deviation, but I could talk about Jefferson
Right.
for an entire episode. He's
Okay.
by far one of my favorite founding fathers. I think he's also one of the most misunderstood in so many different regards.
Super interesting. Super
Oh,
interesting dude.
he was. I would argue he's probably the most intelligent man that's ever been president of the United States.
Well, did he? I might be off on this. Did he hold more patents than Franklin?
I don't know if he did. I just know he was really good in like his literary skills were just incredible, and that's what
Yes,
I see more. Like he has this
but he was also an inventor, though, as well
yes,
as
he was.
uh, a logistician, maybe is what we could say. And what I mean by that in particular is he was frequently modifying his plantation to figure out what the most efficient and productive way to haul ice, to move chopped meat, to do what garden crops they should be going. Huge in ag. I mean, he
Oh
was
yeah,
always tweaking and pulling on systems and trying to figure it out.
yeah, and he was also like even down to his writing desk because he had a portable writing desk that he designed and
Mm,
invented himself to be the most efficient for writing his many, many letters that he would write. He
yes.
really was just like huge on like how do I make everything more efficient? How do I build these things? And when you understand that he's like that and that's what he got from it, that's how you understand Jeffersonian democracy from it, where he saw that when I have to like integrate and work on the land, and I have to work through these systems and these things, and I have to learn how to govern this farm, I now learn how to govern myself, and now I have an understanding of what to do for the country. Therefore, we should have as many people be farmers as possible, so that way they can also
Yeah.
impart these things, so that way they can now learn how to govern. Once you kind of grasp that, it really makes his political system make so much more sense.
Well, and I think to be chauvinistic about it or whatever, um, if there was one thing, if we go back and talk to the founders, it'd be like, guys, I know it's a little bit of a black pill, but I feel like it's going to help us in the end. Could you just not have so much faith in the general man?
Yeah,
Could
it's hard to say that because like when you look, like one of my favorite letters is a letter from John Quincy Adams to John Adams, and he's 10 years old when he's writing this. And he's essentially just saying like I much prefer to like receive letters rather than write them because my thoughts run after me. I'm sorry, Father, but I meant to be 3.5 volumes through the entire history of England written by this guy. I'm only 3 volumes in. Could you give me a better way to proportion my playtime and my studies? And
that
he's
is
literally
wild.
writing this at 10, and that wasn't like horrifically uncommon. You could read a lot of these guys, like their kids were just like learning so much, doing so well, learning like
Yeah.
I mean, Jackson's a great example. He was literally a soldier at the time when he was like 12 years old. He was a POW. He spent
Well,
most of his teens as a POW. Like
and
it's
I know, which is a wild thought.
yeah.
So interesting sort of parallels to St. Patrick. Not really, but kind of. Yeah, but no, I'm thinking like Washington. Yes, blood plays into it, social standing plays into it, but he was a commissioned major at 13 years old, and he's surveying how much land.
Yeah,
Like what?
it's yeah, like it's hard to wrap your mind around just how much more capable our forefathers were in these basic things than we were. And if you
That I
just
think
like,
that's a good point.
yeah, and if you place yourself into the minds of them at that time, like they had just gotten their independence, they had just won it against, the largest empire in the world, and they had defeated
Yes,
them.
these and not just the single strongest, most technologically advanced, the single greatest fighting force in the world.
Yes, on both, I would argue both land and sea, they were the best. And
Yeah,
we had won, and we had no neighbors that were really truly competing with us. Like what is the Spanish Empire south of us? Like Canada is kind of there, but there was nothing that was there really to even contest us now. It's the world at your
yeah,
fingertips. You have this a vast expanse that is out to your west where just ripe for people to come in and settle, and you are capable of doing that already. So like when you look at just
mm,
like what the future lay in store for them, how much they had learned and how much they were, it's why like people really don't understand what is meant by Whig history. They think that Whig history means like that, oh, you get more liberal and more progressive in that sense. But really what they meant by Whig history is just like off of this disposition of how things were and how rapidly they were improving, that things are just going to continue. It's this very optimistic view that things are just simply going to get better. And it would be hard to black pill that much or tell them like don't have too much faith in these people. They just
yeah,
the same way it's hard for us to comprehend just how capable they were as people. it would be very hard for them to comprehend that their descendants would be as much of a shadow as we are of that founding stock.
Yes. So, and I'm going to give you a not a flattering. Eh, maybe I won't. I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about my colonial brethren, but it's not particularly flattering, so I don't know that I will. But it echoes the sentiments you're giving right now. Daxis jumps in chat and he sort of just breaks down what you're saying too. He said they tried to curve the, we'll just say, degradation. They tried to curve that with elections, limiting it to white men who owned land and the electoral college to limit the impact of the common man's votes. They knew the problem. They did not know how bad, just not how bad.
Yeah, and he's not wrong. And I actually kind of like Jackson for a lot of things.
Hmm.
Particularly, I think he was kind of right about central ranking, to be quite honest. But I think
Hmm.
the Jacksonian democracy and expanding the vote, that did have a lot of consequences that knocked on.
Yes.
But they were, I mean, like the landowning thing is so interesting because it does go back to exactly what I said about Jefferson. They just recognize that if you're able to govern your own house and govern your own land and your own property, then now you are able to have a say in governance. And I
Yeah.
think like it's very obvious that there's some merit to this because like what I try to break down when I talk to normies, because I do speak to a lot of people about a lot of different things. But what I try to break down on like why they had this. So if you just think about this, if you had a crackhead who cannot hold a job to save his life, is needs to be on some kind of assistance in order to function, continually falls into that, why should this person be able to have as much of a say about the political futures of the United States if they cannot govern their own life in a way, like if you can't have your own functioning life, how can you then say that the entire have any kind of say in how the country functions? It's a really simple and very basic principle that in some way, shape, or form I think we will need um back again.
Well, that's why it's played out. It's played out, but I do think right now in the 21st century, as we look at the states at where we've come from and what the original requirements were, owning land and things of that nature, I think it all comes back to Heinlein and to Starship Troopers right now.
Yep. So we
You,
have the exact same push then, because I also talk a lot about Heinlein and what he said with Starship Troopers, because it's probably the best, and you know this because having a military background, like it doesn't guarantee that you're not going to be retarded because you've served with
right.
a lot of people that are, but at a minimum,
Yes. Right.
at a minimum, the very sheer fact that you are willing to say, I'm going to go and do this service, I'm going to go and do this thing,
Hmm.
and volunteer, that ostensibly has you putting your needs below that of the needs of your countrymen,
Right.
selects for a group of people that on average is better. And I think you would need to change a lot of things, because right now, like especially in the army, the Marines are less of this, but the army and the Air Force has this. It can be a bit of a jobs program outside of combat
Right.
arms. It can have a lot of
Well,
people that, oh yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, and he does write about that a little bit, but it is one of those areas that has to get fleshed out. In that, once you attach the vote to that, there is a particular incentive to joining the military besides just service. And so, it is a question of how do you. It has to be hard enough that the people who are only joining for the vote have no interest in joining, and
Yeah.
then life without the vote has to be so good for them that again they have no interest in gaining the vote. And
Yeah.
so Heinlein digs into that some with Rico's parents and not actual mercantilism, but how does it affect the producers of the economy and whatnot. Now, ultimately, spoiler alert for those who haven't read the book: one, go read the book, but two, the fact that his son is fighting and he has not. shames Rico's dad into joining. But in that case, it's less about the vote and more about the shame of his son being willing to sacrifice when he hasn't.
Yeah, and he's also spurred on by the destruction of Buenos Aires.
Mm,
But it is a I love that ending where his dad is his platoon sergeant and he's the the platoon leader. But
mm.
anyways, Starship Troopers I think is a little bit further than what we were going. Though I can talk about
Well,
anything.
it's interesting though. And yeah, you're right. I need to get off of this hobby horse. But
I mean,
the
I'll
idea
ride this
that
hobby horse all day because I it's also one of my hobby horses. Is that this is probably the best, most viable solution. So if we want to just talk this, I'm also fine with that.
well, we'll tie it in ever so loosely to North Carolina in that, if I remember correctly, in the book, the sort of idea of this voting class and attachments to a martial force happens in Aberdeen. I believe it happens somewhere in Scotland.
Yeah, yeah, no, it does start in
And
Scotland. It's a bunch of Scottish veterans, and
and
it
it's
happened.
almost a
Yeah,
riot.
yeah,
They
it's
get
Scottish
tired.
veteran. Oh, go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay. But yeah, no, it's Scottish veterans that kick off and they start to do this mainly because the society has decided that we're not going to do like anything around children. That's what kicks off the kind of collapse that then leads to the Federation. It's really interesting in that regard because, especially if you want to tie it into North Carolina, um, the gang members, particularly in like the black community, understand that like there is kid gloves for those who are under the age of 18 in the criminal legals. Like they'll have even like their shooters just be like 14, 15-year olds. They'll have a lot of the
Yes.
guys that are actually running the drugs be like 14, 15, 16 because they know that they want to look up to them. And so like a lot of the older like criminals don't actually do very much themselves. They just get a bunch of like these kids to go run around and do that. And it's interesting to see like that what he's writing about in the 60s be played out in some regards over here.
Yeah. And so some of these guys, there really was this weird moment there, post World War II to roughly 75. Yeah, we'll just say within those 3 decades. For those with an ear to hear, these guys were right on the verge of being called prophetic. And so you see that in Tolkien to some degree. I mean, it's still abstract enough that it doesn't have to be read that way. Certainly, some of Lewis's writings touch on it. Waters is all over it, or not Waters, excuse me, Adams. So Watership Down and all that. Burgess gets, I don't know. I've come to dislike A Clockwork Orange to some degree. I don't know that if it's what I thought it was when I was a kid, but yeah,
I
there was
only know the
something in the
Kubrick
water at that
film.
point. Yeah. So as I remember it, and then we'll get back to North Carolina at some point. But
No,
um,
I'm fine to we can go off on whatever rabbit trail you want. It's fine.
yeah, so as I remember it, what happened is when he originally wrote Clockwork Orange, I'm pretty sure it's Burgess. I think it's Anthony Burgess. We'll just run with that. But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. So he writes it, and then the U.S. publisher said, "Yeah, we don't know about this," and so they ended up cutting out the last chapter of it. So the U.S. on initial publication had a cut version of A Clockwork Orange, and it was not for any tonal reasons. It was not for any content. It was simply because they didn't like the ending of the story. Now, that, as I understand it, is what Kubrick built his film off of. And so ultimately, the film deviates wildly from the book itself. Which one, I haven't seen the Kubrick film. I haven't quite. I was thinking about it today with Eyes Wide Shut, which I haven't seen. I haven't, either out of ignorance or something hasn't clicked with me yet on Kubrick. I haven't taken the Kubrick pill, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean
So
he's a good
that
filmmaker, and I'm quite a big fan of a lot of his stuff.
okay.
Just on an artistic level, I think he makes great movies. I don't know how much I would
Yeah.
agree with all of the themes or everything that he's going over. But there is something to be said about just appreciating like decent art when it is there. I'm curious, but that is interesting. I didn't know that the original release of the book was so different over here.
Yeah. So when I read it, early 2000s, I was able to read the original English publication. So yeah, that was just something that was around. I heard somebody describe Kubrick today though, and I thought it was interesting. They said you have to understand that Kubrick was not a writer first. He was he was a picture man first. And I think that's even what, I don't think they said filmmaker, but the idea was that he was focused on the visuals, and then the story came after the visuals. I
Oh
don't know
no,
if that's fair, but I thought it was interesting.
no, that's completely accurate. If you watch like any of his movies, that comes through very clear. Where it is very
Yeah,
much about the visuals and in everything that he did, whether it's 2001: A Space Odyssey or whether it's
which
The
I've seen that
Shining.
one. I've seen that one. Yeah,
Yeah, but
The
all of these
Shining. I
movies.
thought.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I what I found interesting about The Shining was he was very obviously doing a lot of center shots, and his framing within the film was it was blatant. It was. I'm not saying it was poorly done. I'm saying it was obvious what he was doing. And the nearest comparison I can think of that I've seen to that was recently. Oh, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. I watch It's a Wonderful Life every year, and 2 or 3 years ago it was like, oh my lands, it's like watching Film School 101, and just the framing of the shots that Capra does is crazy.
What do you mean
Because
by
it's
Film School 101 exactly?
because it is he's doing wide angle shots when he's trying to add emotion, or he's doing a center zoom. I mean, George Bailey is right there, and he's close up on his face, and he's trying to show the emotion. The wide angle zoom when he's running through Bedford Falls, and he's excited about it. It is just it's everything you're taught in an online course. It's everything you're taught in your first semester of film school or whatever. Like, and then you're framing in thirds, or you're doing close-ups in the middle, and but it's done with such precision that, again, sort of like how I remember in watching The Shining. It's not the framing is. See, I don't want to say basic because that gives a negative connotation, but it is it's just well done. Without, it's not try hard, it's not goofy, it's not even most of the time, because I don't want to say that there was no artistry in what they were doing, but it's not. And I'm looking at it as a kid from the 21st century, so if we went back, maybe I would walk this back a little bit, but it's not this sort of avant-garde art house um, framing, literally and metaphorically, but it is this is how you make a movie. This is how you build emotion. This is how you focus somebody in on the ideas of what the character is experiencing, and what they are what the filmmaker is trying to have you understand.
So essentially, he's
It's
almost like
kind of
writing the
like,
book on how
well,
you would do
so
this.
yeah, almost, or like he doesn't. And again, I'm framing it in such a way as it sounds bad, but that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is actually compliment these guys. It's almost like uh,
Well, I think writing the book on it's
there is
probably
a
the
precision to what's that?
yeah. I mean, I think writing the book on it's probably the best way to put it because especially if you're talking about a movie
Yeah,
that came out in the 30s, the things that they're writing about are because of things that he has actually done and pioneered and innovated. It might seem
yeah,
like this is what you get taught to do, but when he's making
yeah.
these
And I
things, he's building the book of why you do these things because he intuitively understood to do these things well before
Mhm.
people were just like, this is how you do it. Um,
And I think that is the thing too. Like again, being a 21st century kid, to go back, I think you're right. He is. We now act as if that's all well known, and it's because somebody did this, and we were blown away at the time. So it's a baseball coach, right? It's that idea of getting to the pros and being told fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. So
Yeah, and being able to like appreciate where those fundamentals are built is definitely good. If you want to pivot a little bit
yeah,
on classic films, um, there is one that's pretty near to me.
yes,
That's a North Carolinian movie, which is Carbine Williams. I don't know if you've ever seen that or heard of it.
I'm not familiar with that at all.
Okay, so Carbine Williams, it's a historical film, but it's about Carbine Williams is known by. But he was a prisoner of the North Carolina justice system. And while he was in prison, he developed the mechanisms that made the M1 carbine function as a semi-automatic detached rifle. Gets out of the
They've got
justice
a movie
system. It's a
about this.
contract. What?
Did you say they have a movie about this?
Yeah, no, this is a movie, Carbine Williams. You could bring up the
This is
I
awesome.
don't no,
Okay.
it's a great movie. You'd love it. But yeah, no, it's literally like a guy in the prison system develops the functions of this and then he ends up working with I'm blanking on the actual company that produced the M1 carbine, but he builds it out and works through it and gets it in World War II. But it's a whole movie
Was
about
that
it, and it
Springfield?
came I might have been Springfield. I can quickly just look up. Um, but it's a worthwhile. Very it came out in the 50s, but I'm quite a bit. Had
No
a
joke. Okay, I
yeah,
think let me see if I can get this up here.
but yeah, it's a very great story. Like I just love it because like he was an illegal moonshine distiller, and that's how he knew how to actually build these things out. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Winchester.
Okay. So
He
this one
worked for
with James
Winchester.
Stewart.
Yeah. Yep. Carbine Williams.
Nice. Okay. Well, yeah. So you go straight from Daggum, It's a Wonderful Life to Carbine Williams.
Yeah. No, I like it.
Very good.
It's definitely a worthwhile movie to watch. And it's again, it's one of our hidden things is that he came out of North Carolina, invented. Honestly, I kind
Yes.
of like the M1 carbine more than the M1 Garand myself.
Okay.
I think it's a cooler rifle. And honestly, probably like better fits in many ways, like what rifles would then become, especially the fact that it's gas system, detachable box magazine. The 30
Yes.
carbine, 30 caliber carbine is much more similar to like a 5.56 in terms of what ranges you're shooting at, how many rounds
Hmm.
you could have with it. So I'm a big fan of the M1 carbine. I think it was one of the
Yes.
best rifles
So
we had.
tangentially with North Carolina, um, we will tie that in by saying that's sort of an Appalachian Carolinian way of considering firearms. You're not looking to reach out and touch somebody at 1,000 meters. This is well, and frankly, the game isn't. I'm trying to remember. Biggest game in North Carolina is black bear.
Oh yeah, I believe it's bears. Yeah, that's our. I
Yeah,
don't. I
and
don't
I
think.
don't
Yeah, we
even.
don't think we have anything else besides that.
Was going to say I don't know if
That's
you have a
big
rifle
game.
season on bears, um, but
Oh,
yeah, it's
I don't
very
know. I've
it's
never
very
been bear
much
hunting. I can't speak much on it.
yeah.
I'm
As a
more of
matter of
a.
fact,
I
I have
do.
not.
Yeah, I do deer and I do small game, which
Uh-huh.
actually like I prefer small
Yes.
game I know some people can knock it, but a good rabbit hunt
Squirrel and
is my
rabbit,
absolute
or
favorite.
what?
Yeah, rabbit hunting
Okay.
mainly. I like a good rabbit hunt.
Yes. Okay.
Just because deer hunting's fun and all, but you shoot one of them and you're basically done, and now you got to haul this whole thing out through the woods and do all this, that, and the other. I like to be able to shoot like 7, 8 rabbits, get the meat off of them, do a little bit, and then
Okay.
yeah, rabbit.
Get a
If
full
you
bag.
Yeah, get a full bag of rabbits. Yeah, you get to kill more things. And
Fair
yeah,
enough.
I'll usually take the rabbit. Get the decent bits out of it, wrap it in tin foil, put in like some lemon, butter, a few other herbs, bake that. Turns out it's one of my favorite meals.
Beagles
Highly
are on
recommend it.
foot.
On foot, yeah.
Okay.
I always do hunting on foot. I don't like vehicles.
No, no, sorry,
Oh,
beagles.
oh no 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 no! I've never done hunting with dogs. Never. I think you said
Oh.
vehicles. And I'm like, well, no, I'm
Oh.
not. I'm not driving around like an ATV, like shooting off with like a rigger.
Spotlighting rabbits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. So we've come into the Civil War. North Carolina begrudgingly is too strong, but they're trying to avoid it, eventually jump in. Everything goes on. Um, we're getting into Reconstruction, all that. How is North Carolina affected? And just what was they stand up? The war is over. How did North Carolina bounce? Like what in that manifest destiny period, say 1865 to 17, let's do before World War One. So 1865 to 1905. What is going on in North Carolina?
Um, as far as what is going on in North Carolina, I don't know that I can actually speak too much on Reconstruction just because that's one of the blank spots with me right now. I couldn't tell you a whole lot. But there is one very interesting thing that I find, and this might
Yes.
you could stop me if it gets a little too much for YouTube or for what you're doing. But there's one particularly interesting thing that I find, which is that there is a Baptist preacher who, after Reconstruction has happened, after all this, he writes a romance of the KKK as a novel. And that novel is this is again Thomas Dixon, who is a Baptist preacher over in North Carolina, writes this novel. This novel then becomes D.W. Griffith's basis for The Birth of a Nation. And so, like, that's our contribution to that, is that we have this sort of seed that started there out of just this Baptist pastor who, seeing all this and seeing what's going on, especially as migration is occurring and you have this initial, like, the Ellis Islanders are coming in and other things. He writes again this sort of history of it, extolling this group of people who, somewhat controversial. They have an interesting past to them. But D.W. Griffith makes a movie about it. And then William Seymour, who is a Methodist preacher, watches the movie and then decides, let's recreate this whole thing. And you know what? Maybe they had some interesting stuff to them, and ends up, founding the second iteration of the KKK, which is very different from the first and very different from the third. Um,
Yeah. Now the
it,
third
it,
was Indiana. Is that correct?
I believe it was Indiana, yeah, and it
Okay.
started later. That's the one that had David Duke in it, but they had
Okay.
basically collapsed well after that, been completely kind of neutered by that point. But
Yeah, and then
they
it just becomes a Fed honeypot. So
Yeah, it even became that early on. Like, it was a fed honeypot even uh, in like around the 30s. But
yeah.
it is just interesting if you like trace the genealogy of the second KKK, you find it originating in North Carolina. So that's
Yeah.
my
Well, and
contribution in terms of that. Maybe
you
you could
you
speak
did
more on
also
it.
um not really, but one of the things I find interesting in there is the great switch between Methodism and
Oh, yes.
Baptistic ideas. And that
Yeah.
was My argument more or less would be uh, it was hmm, okay. This is very much whitewashing and adding no nuance and not recognizing the theological convictions of people. So I recognize this. Um, in very broad terms, though, I think you could almost make the argument that the Baptist switch from Methodism was really a rejection of Yankeeism to some degree. If we look at Methodism as sort of the low church version of Episcopalian high Anglo thought, the Baptist, particularly if you get into the SBC, which I want to say was founded in Georgia in the 1830s or 1840s. Um, that would be my argument for the switch is that it was in some ways it was the common man's revolt within the low church of what was going on in the halls of power. But that's very cynical. That doesn't recognize the theological convictions. I think that is just one way of reading what was going on.
Yeah, no, and I have a similar view in that matter where I think that a lot of people have switched to Baptist theology and or to being Baptist in part because I think it resonates more with the American character, particularly the Southern
Mhm.
character. Particularly if you look at the creedal aspect, I think that there's a reason why that per- just disregarding all theological arguments and just looking at like why might you pick one or the other, because I think you can make very good arguments on either end of this. I don't really have much of a dog in the fight on it, and I think that you can trace a lot of pretty like solid stuff out of the early church going either way,
Yeah.
um, as well as through scripture. So just disregarding that, if you were to just acknowledge that both sides have a decent argument in this, Baptists and the fact that they have a creedal aspect of choosing, like I'm going to make this declaration. I think
Yeah.
that that in a lot of ways resonates particularly with white Southern Americans more so than infant baptism does. And I think that that's also
Mhm.
why, like that aspect of it resonating
Well,
with the character has a lot to say about like why this is permeated so much throughout and why, Baptists and non-denoms, if you kind of wrap all of that up, makes up the majority of Protestants.
yeah, which I was going to say, non-denoms are just charismatic Baptists. So,
Yeah, essentially, yeah, they're you're not wrong on that one either.
um, yeah, but it is interesting because the Presbyterians, if we look at Presbyterianism, both in church form and then also in theological convictions, you had the Westminster Divines that did it, but there was also a heavy element of Scots within Presbyterianism and within the expansion of Presbyterianism within the U.S. Um, but where I think they probably shot themselves in the foot was, excuse me, their focus on education, and they very much were um, a credentialism is too harsh, but they certainly focused on credentials more than Baptists, more than even the Methodists to some degree. But again, Methodism, you had that connection with Anglicanism and sort of that high Yankee English society. And so there was sort of this 1-2 knockout that if we go back to the idea of ethnogenesis, and in particular a pre-Civil War ethnogenesis, the Scots Irish, they're all mixing in with the various English groups, and they're forming this sort of southern Americanism, which then if we move into if we move into Reconstruction, post Civil War time, or whatever, I mean, this is traveling with them, and I think that was a time. I think that was a time also where it was anything to grease the tracks. We're talking about railroad expansion. We're talking about holy crap, how do we the whorehouse is already up. How do we get the church up? And so they weren't necessarily looking for the best man. They were just looking for a body to put in front of the pews. Um, yeah, it's the I mean that's like 100 streams unto itself. The idea of how Protestantism spread in the Americas, or the Americas, how Protestantism spread within the United States, and why it has had such a hold within North America.
Yeah, I mean, well, it is ultimately the people that we came from are, for the most part, it was Protestants. You had Maryland, even as a
Yeah.
colony early on. I believe it was in the early 1700s that they actually were, um, the Protestants took it over, and I believe that they even like banned mass inside of the colony. So and you still had Charles Carroll and a couple other prominent Catholics at that time. But for
Yeah.
the most part, it was a Protestant settler people from this particular
Hmm.
region that have made up much of America's background. And I think a lot of people, even a lot of like people that came in here, particularly like Irish and Germans who might have been Catholic, have a lot of them just ended up converting to what was the dominant culture and dominant religion at the time.
Yeah. So in that, and I think you're right on that. That's also part of how it was able to move up north. In that you had um, a lot of the Germans came over as Lutherans. A lot of the Swiss, the Dutch, and whatever, they were coming over. They'd already gone through some form of Reformation, and so even though they're more Lutherans were their own thing, but the Dutch Reformed were more closely aligned with the Presbyterianism. But there really was this sort of stripping away uh, to a big degree within this sort of 1865 to 1905 period
Oh
of
yeah, where it's all starts to just kind of look the same rather than be
yeah,
very
yeah,
distinguished. No, I completely agree because like especially if you look at like the churches then and if you look at the main lines now, like there's hardly anything that distinguishes most of these. They might have some of the trappings, but especially in the main lines, which have been very sadly completely captured by the worst people that are around in America, like I'm talking about like the PCUSA and all these other ones.
yes, yeah, yeah,
Where you'll see pride flags flying outside of the churches,
oh
but
yeah,
yeah, they kind of just that all just kind of came about as this they kind of like lost some of their distinctions, identities kind of blended in. um
hmm
had that kind of backing where they had a lot of the elite out of a lot of these churches were, that's where the wasps were going. It wasn't the
yes,
SBC, and all of
right,
these ended up captured, warped. And I think it's quite interesting that the SBC is like the largest, you could say, main line that's still around and still has a good fight in them to like not go that way.
yeah.
Which
Well,
William Wolf, who's a patriot out of North Carolina, is doing excellent work in that
oh,
regard.
is he out of North Carolina?
Yeah, yeah, no, he's out of North Carolina.
I did,
He's
okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
he's come to some of the North Carolina, the Carolina men's forums that we run. Or
Oh,
sorry, not I am associated with the people who run this, but yes, the Carolina men's forums are something that some of the patriots over in North Carolina put on, where we get a bunch of politicians, people that are interested and that are, you know, intelligent, patriotic men, and a
yes,
bunch of other, like basically like people who are interested in doing something about the state of things. We get them all into a room together. We feed them North Carolina style barbecue, which is the by far the best. And
right,
then
right.
yeah, and
Vinegar all day.
yes, yeah, exactly, vinegar based
Yep.
barbecue. And then we just have a couple
There are
speeches.
some, I'm not saying I
Mhm.
would say this, but I might say this. There are some that would say if there's no vinegar and if there's anything more than vinegar, it's not barbecue.
I might agree with that. But yeah, the barbecue thing is very interesting, especially to see all these Japanese on Twitter who are like now
Oh
observing.
yeah,
Yeah, that there's these barbecue fights, but we could
dude,
talk barbecue all day.
how
I
wild
do
would
want to
that be?
finish just really quick on the North
Yes,
Carolina
yeah,
Hunts
yeah.
Forum. But yeah, so we've set these things up where we get like 100 plus people into a room, have a couple speeches. We've had William Wolf, Stephen Wolf, Andrew Isker give these
Wow. Okay.
yeah. So yeah, they'll come in, give some speeches. We'll have a couple politicians give stump speeches, and then after that, it's networking and speaking. It's hey, I have this organization. Hey, the Nathaniel Green Society is over here. Would you like to join? Would you like to be a member? Is this something that you're interested in? And we just kind of work to build something out because once you get like when you get 100 patriots into a room to talk about a problem and to interact with each other, that is really how you had the foundations of this country in the first place. It was a bunch of guys getting together in bars, in smokehouses, in
Hmm.
coffee houses, in all of these places, talking about these things. How do we work through this? The history of the committees of correspondence and the Sons of Liberty is something that is very much worth studying. But if you look at this way of working through these things, like that is like the step one. How do we fix a problem?
Yeah.
Is doing that, and so I've been very happy to be a part of that. Now, if you want to talk more about that, we can. If not, I am more than happy to continue on with barbecue.
Well, I do want to. Daxis came in with another question, and I want to. I think this is how we'll put a bow on sort of the religious change post
Mhm.
Civil War, um, because I think you hit on something in there earlier when you had mentioned the whole idea of credo baptism and that idea of taking part or being the representative of your religion, so to speak. He said, "Do either of you think it would have worked for American colony beginnings had they been Catholic and not Protestant?" So I'll let you answer that, and then I'll jump in with my thoughts.
Sure. And I'm going to be honest. Like, I don't like alt history very much. I love history, but I don't like the speculations on it. And that is a bit of a cop out. But it is to say that no, I don't think. I think it would have been a very different kind of colony if it was Catholic versus that it was Protestant. Like it would have worked because Catholics clearly could colonize and make colonies. They made them all over the place. The Spanish, the Portuguese, like they had tons of them. But what America is has an extremely Protestant characteristic to it, down to the very fact that the reason why America was even colonized in the first place by the English was a part of an arms race against the Spanish after the Spanish Armada had been defeated, and it was in response to the I believe it was the Edict of Toledo is the word for it, or what it's called, but it's where the Catholic Church had essentially decided like this section of the world is going to go to Spain, this section of the world is going to go to Portugal. You guys are going to get to colonize all of this, and England, being a very new in its Reformation and being Protestant, was contesting this and was trying to make sure that Spain would not get to take hold of all of the Americas. And so they start these colonies and they have these things there. But it's clearly in the character, I think, that it is very Protestant, especially in the fact that you have this kind of diversity of religious backgrounds that come there. There is just a different character that the Puritans are going to have or the Anglicans are going to have, especially not even just ethnically, but also just by their religion. It's going to change how it was. And especially in North Carolina, we're talking about that aspect. Like, we didn't actually let Catholics hold political office in the original state constitution. You actually had to affirm specifically Protestantism in order to be in public office. It specifically says must affirm the truth of the Protestant religion. Um, so I think it characterizes how America is,
Yeah.
and that's where I would come from on it. I don't know. Do you have a difference on that?
Um, I think we're more or less going along the same route. I would say Ultimately, my initial gut reaction is to say that no, it wouldn't have worked, and I come at it from two different ways. The first one is the theological argument, and when you really start jumping into a sacramental versus an ordinal, ordinal is an ordinances um, expression of the faith. Let me figure out how to do this politely, and you guys will probably see my biases show. One is about recognizing what what Christ has done, what Christ is doing, and participating in that. The other one is more about recognizing what Christ has done and continuing on to show what Christ is doing through your life. So, again, this is very broad sweep, but my argument would be that the sacramental impetus is different than the credo or the ordinal impetus. And I think that does play out in overall arguments regarding biospirit. So that's the theological argument. And then the sort of the more practical, or at least the historical argument, is that England had already separated from the Catholic Church at this point. Yes, the king is supposed to be the head of the church, but there was already enough separation there between church and state, um, that there was enough momentum that it really didn't matter that the Anglican churches were here in the states, because ultimately they would become Episcopalian, and they would continue on in the separation that it had already started when the Anglican Church separated from the Catholic Church. And this only gets um, it only gets further emphasized when you look into what the Scots Irish and the hardcore Westminster folks were doing in their Presbyterian churches, how they were arguing, and the very fact that King George's was it King George that did it? I'm sorry, but one of the slurs that was used against Americans during the Revolutionary War is that this was the Presbyterians' war.
Yeah, there's a specific captain who actually goes even further to say this is nothing more than a Scots-Irish Presbyterian revolt, and he just wrote that down in one of his notebooks. So minor guy who said that, but um, there was definitely like a theological backing to it, where it was coming out of a reformed people. And if you look at very specifically the Scots Irish, they were the most common people to actually pick up arms. That demographic of
Yeah,
people was the most likely to serve. They were less represented in the higher echelons, but in terms of like Kings Mountain and Moores Creek and all of these places, like it was a bunch of Scots Irish guys who picked up rifles and decided to fight there. Which Moores Creek is a very
yeah,
fascinating battle out of North Carolina.
and so this does get into the various biological arguments, and I'm relatively I'm a relatively convinced HBD guy, and basically my thoughts are that yes, all men are made in the image of God, because I think that is something peculiar and something particular that transcends the various nations. But I also think that the nations have their own vices, struggles, temptations that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes are unique to them, either in emphasis or even in the thing itself. And
Yeah.
so the question then, with it being, was it the Presbyterians war or was it the Scots Irish war? Yes.
It's both. And I love that you're touching on that. That's actually one of my hobby horses, which is if you look at the splits in religion, and you obviously like the theological arguments are very real. There are very distinct differences between these. At the same time, I think it has to acknowledge that there's a reason why Germanic peoples, for the most part, are where you find Protestantism coming out. There's a reason why the Latin
Mhm.
peoples, and particularly France, Italy, all of these is where you have, Catholicism have its strongest roots at. There's a reason why
Yep.
the Greek Orthodox split is the Greek Orthodox split. Why you see it falling along the lines that had been set forward by the Western and Eastern Roman Empire, why the Coptics, why the Monophysites come out of this particular group. It's not to say that like all of these different churches, there's no like, it's all just purely subjective and it all just comes out of it. But rather that when you're looking at what is objective truth, what is there, God as this being this creator, you are ultimately going to understand and relate to him in a finite way that comes from these different aspects of you. And part of that is going to be the biological, in that if we understand and recognize that people are going to have different governments, different cultures, different societies, and there's going to be some ethnic tie to that, it then makes
Yep.
sense that different ethnic groups are simply going to end up with different ways of relating to God that then give them
Yep.
differences in terms of what churches they have. I think if anything, that's largely what Paul recognizes when he's speaking to Peter and when he's talking to him about like the differences in how you're acting with the Greeks versus how you act with the or with the Gentiles and Jews are going to cause a split in the
Right.
church. Like there's a
Yep.
recognition that there is going to be these differences, but when you elevate one over the other and you start to make it like this is how you're going to work out, that's how splits are going to happen. What do you know? Like there's all these splits that occurred in Christianity, and
Yes.
they tend to be along these ethnic lines, along these nations.
Yes.
So I think
Yep.
that that's actually one of the
Well,
best
and
ways
there.
that you go ahead.
Uh, no, I'm just backing up everything you're saying too. It is so if we go back to the idea of who it was that decided to become an English colonial, who was that decided to, and even down into the colonies, who was that decided to stay as things got a little bit harder than they expected or weren't quite as good. You sort of have the same thing in the Holy Roman Empire in that when Lutheranism comes about, various princes declare their loyalties. And there was a moment in time where the peasants, and yes, I realize this is harder than what I'm saying, but in theory, at least, the peasants had the opportunity to say, "Well, no, my convictions are Catholic, or my convictions are Lutheran," and so then they would be able to move out of the various German territories to participate in that expression of the faith that they thought was most aligned with scripture or whatever it was, whatever external pressures or biological impetus was causing that. And so it was just a further sorting of the people groups that would make this work in the US.
Yeah, and I think you can definitely see that too, in just the differences that you see within where was the Protestant Germans, where were the Catholic Germans, and
Mhm.
you see like there's a big difference, especially even up to like the 20th century. You look at the voting maps of who was voting for who under the Weimar Republic; they're very different, and it's broken up based off. It maps very cleanly to which religious group was where in terms of who supports what.
Yes.
So I think all of it ties in together, and when you understand that there's these connections, um, that's probably the best thing that could actually help Christianity right now is recognizing that. I think that that's one of the most important things that we could have is just getting back this understanding that used to be very present and isn't anymore, and where now you have just kind of a mess that comes about when you don't have that. Um,
Yeah. All right. Go on for a second.
oh yeah, sure.
I'm actually writing something to you. But yeah, so we
No
we
worries.
got through that. We were talking about you know, we're post Civil War at this point. We're seeing
Yes.
the
Okay, so we're
SBC
going back to North
explode
Carolina
throughout the
history.
states. Yeah. Yeah, we're seeing the SBC explode throughout the states including North Carolina. Is so that what starts affecting North Carolina prior to the Civil War? Are we already seeing a Southern identity come in? Are we seeing a trying to jump into American industry? Is there a focus on agriculture? What's going on with North Carolina right now?
Are you talking prior to the Civil War?
No, post Civil War.
Oh, post Civil War now. And give me the time frame just one more time. So it's
Just
what
post Civil
specific
War
years?
and before World War One,
Before World War One. Once
or
more,
even let's count World War One as a fluke. Between post Civil War and pre World War Two.
well, I know that we're very big on agriculture, and that's ultimately what we're known for is just uh, what we have out of NC State and what we've been able to produce out of that. But it is still, I think, we had a mainly agricultural purpose for this.
When did
But I'm honestly, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know enough about specifically North Carolina history between that era to then. I could talk a lot afterwards. I could talk the modern era, but my mainstay of focus is just Revolutionary history and Civil War
okay?
history. I'm still, I don't want to speak too much out of my, uh, you
Yeah,
know,
no
rear
worries.
end.
So what I will say top level is I believe Pepsi started it at this point. And so let's see, Pepsi comes in. Sorry, guys. Okay, 1893. It's called Brad's Drink, and it was sold from his drugstore in New Bern. It was renamed to Pepsi in 1898, or excuse me, it was renamed to Pepsi Cola in 1898, and then ultimately be shortened to Pepsi in 1961. Now, that the original factory in New Bern, which is off towards the eastern side of North Carolina, is no longer being used, but it is still there. And I want to say they still run what you call it tours through there, but I might be off on that. So Pepsi starts out there. The I believe the primary cash crop in North Carolina at this point is tobacco. Now I might be a little bit
No,
off
you're
on.
right on that. Like we were like the Durham area in particular. Like we were still major on tobacco, and that was our primary crash cash crop.
Yes. Well, and that's so I'm trying to pull up. Yeah, so Winston tobacco, Winston cigarettes started in the Winston-Salem area of North Carolina. That's where it was, excuse me, that's why it carries that name, is because it was coming out of that particular area of North Carolina. Now this is in 1954. So it's later on the scene, right after World War II, but that's because there had already been a developed tobacco. Let me figure out how to say it. So in agriculture, what will happen, you will have an industry, like let's talk about hemp right now. There will be a hope that something is going to come in here and work, and a lot of times it's going to fail. Jefferson writes a lot about this, about the crops that were working. Washington even talks about the crops, or excuse me, not the crops, but the various plants that he was using as barriers for hedgerows, things of that nature. And so he's writing about these things. And so all this is coming in. Guys are trying to figure out which crops work. They find out between the humidity and between the soil types that within North Carolina, tobacco is awesome. So uh, they're planting. They develop the industry. The industry blows up. I believe even prior to the Revolutionary War, North Carolina was already well renowned for their tobacco. Does that sound right?
Yeah, no, that's correct. We've pretty much that has been the staple of North Carolina's agriculture has been tobacco.
Yes,
In
and
turn,
so the
we're very
the
much like
you would
Virginia was at that era. I mean, we have
yeah.
cotton, we had other things, but it was tobacco that
So
ours was
what
on.
you will see with tobacco throughout the history of the U.S. is it really was um, the only other player that, and this is where guys from North Carolina and Kentucky can get into fights. Virginia absolutely grew tobacco. However, it was a little bit more niche. Some would argue that it was a little bit more refined than what was being grown in North Carolina and Kentucky. But both Kentucky and North Carolina, up until the 2004 tobacco bill, were the leaders in tobacco production, and not just in domestic sales of tobacco production, but exports as well. The tobacco bill in 2004 just totally decimated the market in both states. They ended the quota system, opened it up to private sales. Um, North Carolina ultimately, and I'm jumping out of our time season here. We'll get back to this sort of pre World War II. But what happened is that North Carolina was able to pivot, and Kentucky did not pivot quite as well. Kentucky is doing better, but they did not pivot as well initially. All right, so you've got tobacco going on. You've got Pepsi comes about. When did the furniture industry within North Carolina blow up? Do you happen to remember?
I cannot recall that. Um,
I
the furniture
believe that's
industry.
post Civil War, but I might be wrong.
Yeah. I
Let's
like
see.
I said, unfortunately,
No, you're good.
I spend most of my time on the 18th and the 17th century. I've spent more time reading um, news and newspapers of that era than I do often on news of the 21st century. But once you get to the 20th and on, I can speak generally on it, but
Sure.
the hard specifics I'm just not great at. And I know how
Okay.
North Carolina is now just purely from living in it.
So at this point, a
Mhm.
quick pull up on Google. North Carolina is the largest employer of U.S. furniture manufacturing still currently, with a historic hub in the Piedmont Triad region. Now that's going to include High Point, Hickory, and Thomasville. So this, we were talking about New Bern, we were talking about the eastern side of North Carolina. This is all the way towards the Blue Ridge Parkway and the foothills of North Carolina, Appalachia. And out there, for whatever reason, I can't remember if it was due to the woods they had out there or what, but that absolutely became the North Carolina furniture industry. Okay, the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, as in Richmond, Virginia, for some reason they have an article about this. Um, let's see, and they're talking about North Carolina. Now they're going into the actual economics of it in the 1990s through the early 2000s, but they've got a little bit on here, and it says the tradition of woodworking craftsmanship in North Carolina's Piedmont region has its roots in the 1800s, when cabinet makers in the Moravian settlement of Salem, which is now Winston-Salem, and the Quaker communities of Randolph and Rowan counties created furniture pieces that are still highly valued as collector's items and museum pieces. So that is interesting. I did not realize that was coming out of Quaker furniture.
Huh. Yeah, I didn't know that either. I know that right now we're just really big on our financial sector is pretty big out in the Charlotte area too, as long along with like medical and
Yes.
by
Okay.
yeah, that like our pharmaceuticals are huge here. And that's mainly what we've pivoted into. And I think it's kind of fortunate because it draws in a lot of people into North Carolina, and I would rather have less people be moving into here for those industries. That's part of
Yeah.
the
So we're
issue
gonna
of
have to
that pivot.
we're gonna have to talk about that too. Sort of the IT expansion, the different things blowing up in Atlanta and the South in general. I mean, it's a both and, right? Like you want your state to succeed economically, and at the same time, it draws in everything from carpetbaggers to third worlders.
Yeah, I mean, and I
Um,
think Florida seems to have gotten the right mix of this, where they're able to
okay.
have like booming industries. But if you look
Hmm.
at the populations of who goes to Florida, they've made themselves oppressive to anyone that would vote blue. And so those
Okay.
people leave the state But they also bring in people while still having a solid background on that end. Like, and so like North Carolina, like ideally, like you have to make an environment out of it to where if that is your inclination and that's what you want, you find the atmosphere of this place too oppressive to stay here. And so you simply leave. Or based off of what laws are in place. Like even things like it's shocking like how little some of these things can actually do it. But even things like a bathroom bill are able to get people to leave a state and decide, you know what, I'll just go to Colorado. I'll just go to California. And so if you have
Yes.
something like that is actually how you were able to preserve it. Because right now, uh, like we are kind of on like razor thin margins on in North Carolina. We're starting to turn purple.
There
Um,
is a from my perspective, there is a shocking amount of what's the phrase, non-white Hispanics, or
yes.
maybe it's, yeah, okay, yeah, and that has been going on for decades.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed a lot of the demographics and the makeup here, where that
Yeah.
is not something that we have historically had. But you go to some of these areas, especially in the Piedmont, and yeah, no, there's a major transformation that is occurring.
Yep. So I do want to jump back to that article just to so you guys know I wasn't crazy. So we started with Quakers way back, and there's a chart on here that says exponential growth. In 1890, North Carolina had $159,000 worth of furniture production. In 1900, they jumped up from 159, so in 10 years, from 159,000 to 1.5 million. In 1929, post World War One, pre World War Two, we are producing at $56,700,000 worth of furniture. North Carolina at this point in history, pre World War Two, in furniture, and that was just one area of industry, is no joke. The you I was going to frame it in a way that lifted North Carolina up, but I was also going to piss on some other people, so I'm not going to do that. Um, no, North Carolina is doing very well. They were able to get a little bit of um, get a little bit of fire in the bush thanks to the Wright brothers, and then that just the idea of Kitty Hawk and the idea of the Wright brothers having been down there enabled a little bit more tourism. The tourism on the East Coast in particular has always been huge. And then you had money coming in through the Biltmore. What's the school in Asheville?
Oh,
It's not a UNC, is it?
no, I think I can't remember the actual school. I know it's a very hippie liberal art school in
Yes.
Appalachia, which makes it very much stand out because you do not expect that out of Appalachia to have
Mhm.
that. It's Appalachian State, actually, if I remember the name of the
Is it?
university.
Okay.
Yeah, I
That's where
believe
Eric
it's
Church went, I
Appalachian.
think. It
That's where
might be.
what?
Okay. Eric Church, the country singer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
went there.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't shock me at all. Yeah, no, it's Appalachian State University.
Perfect.
Is at
Well,
least I
hey, I'm
believe
thinking
the one that's nearby. Yeah, go ahead.
we're digging into this. I mean, even a little bit more than I expected. Do you want to
Mhm.
do a round two in the future?
Yeah, I would be more than happy
Okay.
to. No, I've had a good time.
Yeah, because
Especially, I
I'm
love
thinking
going
maybe
off on tangents and rabbit holes and
yes.
speaking on all
Okay.
these different things. So,
Oh, it's awesome. I'm love
and also I
hearing.
could come back with a little bit more research done prior of what happened in North Carolina between the years
I know where.
1865 and
Well,
2000.
it's one of those funny things in the U.S. because we had the Mexican American War. We had the wait, yeah, and the Spanish. Yeah, those were both there. So
Yep. Wait, oh wait, the
we
Spanish happened. Well, the Mexican American was 1848, and Spanish was 1900.
There we go. There we
Yeah.
go. Okay, yeah, I was off by about 12 years on Mexican. Um, yeah, so you've got the Spanish American War that goes on during there. You've got the various industries within North Carolina blowing up. You have got agriculture and how it's being affected both by exports and I don't even know if external pressures is the right way to frame it, but the introduction of the steam engine to the internal combustion engine, tractors, and so on. So, yeah, it is a period of time that's easy to overlook, but also had some crazy things going on. I do want to finish though. I've got I don't even know how to say the name, but I'm going to throw this up. And if you've got any quick thoughts on this, um,
Oh,
I have no
quick
quick thoughts
thoughts
on
on
this.
this
So,
question. Yeah, this is definitely something I can. What's missing from politics in present day America?
we could go back an
What's
hour
we
ago
could It would
and
be a
say
lot easier
limiting
to
the
answer
vote.
what's present that's good in politics in present day America. If I had to give like one thing, at least on like my side of things, that I want to be
Yeah.
more present, would be active participation from people who are intelligent and patriots. Because right now, there's not a crown that is in the gutter. The best way to describe what is going on with the current like Republican Party and infrastructure is that there
Mm,
are a million tiny crowns that are in the gutters of every single state. That there are all of these local GOPs, these little like meta political institutions, like even things like the Rotary Club of all things is actually has a good amount of money and a good amount of influence on a local level and can actually like punch above its weight, but it's like staffed by
yeah.
people that are all geriatrics that are just desperate for someone to come in that has a good amount of free time on their hand, is willing to do some stuff without much pay, but essentially they will just hand these things over. Like, to give one story out of this, there's a friend of mine who showed up late to a local GOP meeting, 20 minutes late. And by the end of that meeting, just simply by the fact that they happened to be holding an election for a position, got 30% of the vote simply by being a young man who showed up. And then not too long after that, managed to get a chair at the GOP for the county.
Yes.
It is unbelievably easy to actually like get some level of sway in these positions that are available. It just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, learning Robert's rules, showing up clean and presentable, not shutting out. And if we could literally just have that, we would be able to like then take the system enough to move it into the correct direction to fix a lot
Yeah.
of things. So if it's one thing, it's just effort and showing up.
Okay.
That is what I would
Yeah.
like out of things that are not a general election.
So mine's a little bit of a cop out, but I do think the idea of a single story is not even on the radar right now, especially once you get past your district level. Um, uh, Within states, I don't think there's a single story. Certainly within, like you had alluded to, within the Republican Party, even within the DNC, there's no single story within them. And then certainly once you get into general elections, there is not a single story of who the U.S. people are and what it is we're trying to achieve. And I think that is probably the primary portion of what's missing currently in politics. I do think it's a little bit of a cop out. That's not really a tactical question. It's almost
No,
like saying
you're
what's
hitting
wrong with the
something that
night. And that,
extremely important, and that we could do an entire stream on that I would love to, which is something I hit on a lot, which is that the narrative is not present right now, and you
Yeah.
need narratives that are grand and give a myth, and that's been a thing since the Roman era. Like
My
there's
hope,
yeah
my my fear and my hope is that they are not trying to pull a Hail Mary story out of Iran currently. I some guys think that could cause a, at least temporarily, a single story. Use it as a Pearl Harbor event. I don't think I don't think it's strong enough to do that right now. I don't think the
no
country is ready for something like that.
no I don't think so either.
Um, but
And
all right.
no, yeah, but go ahead.
Well, no, you're good. Go ahead, finish.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the Iran thing is like a lot of this comes down to the 24-hour news cycle. But my hope and what I think is most likely going to happen is like most people are not going to remember Iran that much, even after a year or two from now. It's big right now because it's simply what's in the news. But even after the initial attacks, like has much even happened? It doesn't seem like a crazy amount really has after the initial part has, unless you're like really tuning into it. But again,
Yep.
like the other thing you got to remember is like all of you are given an algorithmic bubble to show you whatever you want to see, and understanding that that is not how everyone else thinks, or that is not all that is going on, is also very imperative.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah,
All
but
right. Well, hey,
yeah, you can
perfect.
wrap now.
Where can folks find you? Yeah, we'll wrap up for tonight, and then offline we'll figure out when we want to come back for part two and keep
Yeah,
digging in
absolutely.
North Carolina. But
Yeah, so
where can folks find
you
you?
can
And
yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Kaiser Lohengramm. Um, I post a lot on there. I post a lot of what should probably go on my Substack onto Twitter quite often. And I also have a Substack, same name, same at. You can also find me on The Green Tavern on YouTube. I am one of the hosts for that show. It is our flagship show. You should also check out the Nathaniel Green Society. We are the Old Glory Club's chapter over in North Carolina, doing a lot of great things. If there's any chance that you're over there, we would love to hear from you.
very good. All right. So yeah, the X account you will find in the description. I need to update that for the Substack. And perfect. Hey, I greatly appreciate it, brother. We're gonna
Yeah, no
call it
problem. It
quits
was a
for
great
this
time.
evening. All
Yeah,
right.
I'm glad we could
Well,
go on a lot of these tangents and rabbit holes. And it
yeah,
seems that we have a
right.
lot. It seems that you bringing up things that I didn't know as many people were interested in that are also my hobby horses. So we
Hey,
ought to
that
do a little bit
works.
more in the future.
That'd be fine. That'd be fine. All right, guys. You have a good evening, and we will see you next week.
Good night.
Adios.